On the day that we were shot down, there were 2 airplanes from our squadron which were escorting an Air Force reconnaissance airplane out over the Gulf of Tonkin. And then a little series of things that all contribute to something bad happening take place. Like we had an equipment problem with our radios on the airplane. We were flying above clouds and got separated from the other 2 airplanes that we were with. We got on the radio and said, hey, we got a problem. We're not sure whether, to this day, whether anybody heard us or not. But finally we found a break in the clouds, could look down and saw that we were over land, and we knew that was a bad thing because we were supposed to be out over the water. So we turned 180 degrees and headed east and declared an emergency. And the next thing that happened, we heard a loud boom, which it turns out was a surface-to-air missile exploding below and behind the airplane. I can remember thinking, oh my, I'm going to be a POW. I looked over to the side of the cockpit where I could look at the mirror up by the pilot, and he gave me a thumbs up, which usually means that's a good sign that, you know, obviously we have a problem, but a thumbs up meant that I think we're going to be okay. And the next thing I knew, it got real windy in the back seat. And in this occasion, I think the thumbs up meant I'm out of here. I broke through the clouds in my parachute and came down. I was about a quarter of a mile off the coast of North Vietnam. And I could see some people putting a log boat into the water while I was still in my parachute. So I was only in the water about 20 minutes. This boat came out, had 2 or 3 people in it, as I recall. There's certain universal language that is understood no matter what language it's spoken in, and one of them is when somebody with an AK-47 sticks it in your face like this, your hands kind of go to the I give up position. I had a pistol which I had jettisoned at sea because I knew if somebody had, if it was me with my little pistol against some well-armed people, it was going to be a real short war. So I didn't want any problem with that. So I jettisoned my pistol before they picked me up. They hustled me into this Jeep, took my shoes off, and I think I was tied up. And we blindfolded, and the Jeep took off. It stopped a couple of times during the course of the night at what I can only describe as a pep rally. They pulled into a little village. There'd be a whole bunch of people up there whooping and hollering with some of the political leaders leading cheers and fight songs, and they would get you out of this Jeep and march you around the village and call you dirty names, I'm sure, and shake their fist at you, and then half an hour later you'd be back in the Jeep and off on another jaunt, not knowing where you were going, but pretty suspicious that it would be to Hanoi. And the gates swung open and they marched me into this, what turned out to be the old French prison built in Hanoi in the 1800s, which became known as the Hanoi Hilton. So that in this camp, the zoo, there was a driveway that came in and made a circular route around the inside of the camp. And so if there were some senior officers coming, they would get a working detail out to sweep up the leaves and stuff and make it have a better appearance. That provided an opportunity to communicate with everybody that was in the camp by the manner in which you swept the streets with your broom. And there's a communications code called the TAP code, which enabled whoever was sweeping to pass information to everybody who was listening. And so if the guy was sweeping, everybody in the camp could hear him, and it was like a town crier. He would tell you all the latest news that the guy knew, and he'd be tapping it, and all they had to do was sit and listen, and you could get the latest news. It might be 6 months old, but it was news to us. We had 3 different types of soup over the course of a year. There was 4 months of spinach soup, 4 months of cabbage soup, and 4 months of pumpkin soup, twice a day. You could almost mark your calendar by when the food changed. You can take your pumpkin soup and mash up the pumpkin, put rice in with it if you're having rice, or if you're having bread that day, you tear your bread up into little pieces, put it in the soup, stir it all up, and and visualize it as Hungarian goulash or macaroni and cheese or whatever. It's still going to taste the same, but it helps you mentally. As your grandmother used to tell you, you don't have to like this. All you have to do is eat it. A fact of life there, that you were mistreated. It was more so in the first years than the second, but the Vietnamese were very willing to hold that threat over your head and to utilize physical discomfort when they deemed necessary. There were times when there were a couple of escape attempts, and that started purges that would last for months at a time, where people were brutally tortured. The initial interrogations involved extensive torture. There's just no other word to describe it. But it was not something that happened every day. Sometimes you thought it was going to, and they certainly tried the psychological thing of telling you, okay, if you don't do what we want you to do here, we're going to beat you up really good. And the threat that they would most often try to use always said, well, someday when the war ends, if you don't cooperate, we're not going to let you go. We're going to keep you here. I don't think anybody believed them, but it was always something in the back of your mind that could be a possibility. But yes, physical torture was a part of the experience, but it didn't happen every day. On July 6th of 1966, the United States conducted air raids in Haiphong and Hanoi for the first time. That was a significant step as far as the Vietnamese concerned. To think that the United States would bomb a target in Hanoi made them very angry. And so that night they took most of the people from this camp, the zoo, and some people from another camp. There were less than 100 prisoners total at that time. They took about 55 or 60 of us, loaded us in trucks. This is about 6 o'clock at night. And we were blindfolded. We didn't know where we were, but they took us to downtown Hanoi. They got you out of the truck. They handcuffed you to one other prisoner, and you were sitting on the floor on the street here, out in the middle of this residential area. They had Vietnamese soldiers on both sides of this line of people. And when they took the blindfolds off and told you to stand up and you were walking, they turned a corner and the streets were lined. It was like a 4th of July parade. And the streets were lined with people, 6, 7 deep in rows on both sides. And there were political cadre, like block captains or something, that were out there in their uniforms, leading the cheers of the people, shaking their fist at you and calling you bad names. And it's a really wonder that somebody didn't get killed in that what we came to be known as the Hanoi March, where they took, and this was most of the uninjured people, and some of us that were not severely wounded, that were in this march, because the Vietnamese, after about the first block, the cadres were trying to keep the people back from throwing rocks at us and hitting you over the head with shoes. It's a wonder somebody didn't get a knife stuck in their back when that was going on. It ended up a couple hours later at a soccer stadium in downtown Hanoi. And when they opened the gates of the stadium to try to get the prisoners in here, there was a surge of civilian population in Hanoi that just burst right through the gates at the same time. They ended up with all the Americans sitting out in the middle of this soccer field with soldiers all around us trying to while they tried to get all the civilians out of here. The problem was not actually getting out of the prison. Now, the big old French prison, that would have been pretty tough, because the French really built a secure prison. But the first camp, the one I referred to as the zoo, it had roof tiles on board that if you could get up into the overhead and could have gotten out of the camp. But the problem was, what were you going to do then? Because there was no infrastructure. There was not, wasn't like World War II in France or Germany or stuff where there was the resistance and things like that, and you could blend in with the other people. As an American in North Vietnam, you were not going to be able to blend into anything. And the rudimentary things that had to happen each day. We had 2 meals. They came around and you had to eyeball everybody through the little peephole in the door in the morning and at night. Most days you didn't go out of the room for anything. But the thing that you have to keep in mind is that when you wake up in the morning, you have no idea what that day holds. It's the constant in the back of your mind saying, okay, what's going to happen next? I'm sure our blood pressure jumped 30 or 40 points when a guard would come on the walkway outside your room and just rattle the keys to the door. Because if they came to the door, opened the door, pointed at you or gave you whatever Vietnamese name they had assigned to you. It was a Vietnamese word. I have no idea to this day what the name that they gave me meant. It may have been dirty dog or something like that. If they told you to put your shirt on and your long trousers on that you were going off to see somebody, that was not good. Nothing good ever happened when you went out, and nothing good ever happened at night either. February 12th was the first day of prisoner release in accordance with the agreements that were signed in Paris at the end of January 1973. And then in my personal case, I was on the first airplane home from Clark Air Force Base on Valentine's Day of 1973. There were 20 guys on the first airplane home, and I had the good fortune to be one of them. The adjustment process to life in the 70s was pretty remarkable in itself. That was quite an experience as well. Fortunately for us, the one thing that everybody could agree on about the Vietnam War is that they were glad to have us home.